Hello, this is Smokey, and today I'd like to show you a gateway-based Endstone farm for 1.13. This farm is identical in concept to all of the 1.12 gateway-based Endstone farms, except for one major change, which was Mojang fixing End Crystal Fire breaking blocks in the End dimension. In 1.12, we used that bug to very easily break all of the gateway bedrock and the gateway block itself. Now, in 1.13, the only practical method of breaking the gateway is with headless piston setups, which increases the redstone footprint considerably compared to 1.12. The biggest disadvantage to using pistons, though, is that in 1.13 and above, there are no setups that keep all of the pistons in block form, and one piston in a setup will always pop off into item form. This means that although you theoretically wouldn't lose any pistons in a perfect farm layout, you now need an AFK player to replace pistons, unlike in 1.12 when it was fully automatic with end crystals. Unfortunately, the layout of this farm is not perfect, and as you saw in the cinematic, you need a small supply of about 16.5 pistons per hour to run this farm. Most of the pistons get recycled back to the player, but it's like trying to collect all the saplings from a tree farm. Theoretically, you might be able to design a layout that would have hopper minecarts inside the pistons that pop off as items, in turn giving you a 100% return rate. But for this layout, I was only able to spam hoppers and hopper minecarts to try and pick up as many pistons as possible. To give a bit of perspective, one double chest of pistons would get you around 125 million Endstone, so the piston loss rate is fairly negligible in my opinion. To run the farm, you need to grab a stack of pistons and fill up the rest of your inventory with any random item. And then you can step in here, click the lever, and you'll be trapped in this area with a dropper continuously dispensing pistons at you. Then you can hold down right click at this back iron trap door and AFK just like this while the farm runs. To turn it off, you can stop placing pistons, click the lever, and walk out. In creative mode, you can just use a command block, set blocking pistons for convenience, and it will work exactly the same. Unfortunately, this farm is affected by the client-side tile entity buildup bug that affects nearly every large redstone build in 1.13, so if you want a normal client to AFK in this farm for longer than 10 minutes without crashing, you need to install Tweakaroo or some other client mod that can fix this bug. And just keep in mind, this is only the client, the server can still be vanilla. You can even run this with a vanilla client, but like I said, you'll need to relog every 10 minutes or you'll crash. Since the End Crystal Fire fix was the only change between 1.12 and 1.13, other than having to add coral to the TNT dupers in the blast chamber, I will only be explaining more about the gateway removal and the survival setup of this farm for the rest of the video, so if you want to fully understand how exactly gateway-based endstone farms work, you should watch the 1.12 videos, which are linked in the description. And one more thing I should probably mention is that I actually finished this farm over a year ago by now, but never got around to making a proper video on it. And in that time, TIS actually built this farm in their 1.13 survival world, which is nice. But in that time, I was also able to modify this 1.13 farm to work in 1.14 and 1.15 as well. And although a fair number of things changed in those versions, the farm is nearly identical to this one, so I should have a small update video to this one coming out in the near future for 1.14 and 1.15 endstone farms. The 1.14 farm works exactly the same in 1.15. Nothing changed between 1.14 and 1.15. Alright, so now let's talk more about the gateway removal. The easiest method of breaking most of the gateway bedrock is just by having pistons facing into where the outermost layer of bedrock will generate, and you start extending those pistons right before the gateway generates, so once it does generate, it will remove the piston heads, and then you can retract all of the headless pistons to remove the outer bedrock. Now you don't necessarily need to remove all the outer bedrock, as you may have seen in a 1.12 endstone farm, You can get away with not having to remove 2 of the bedrock on one side of the gateway, or even 4 bedrock at some island locations, because we're always generating the gateway on the edge of the region it searches for isblock normal cubes. So remember, isblock normal cube is basically any full cube, like stone, glowstone, bedrock, etc. So when the gateway searches for those regions, we generate it on the edge of the region it searches for, which means that the bedrock will be out of range the next time the gateway searches for isblock normal cubes, making it generate in the same position as before instead of above these bedrock blocks that we left behind. But this doesn't really matter in 1.13 because you need to utilize all of the space around the gateway for other things such as pistons and whatnot. So we just go ahead and remove all of the bedrock anyway, even though you necessarily wouldn't have to. After you remove the outer bedrock, you are only left with the 2 inner bedrock and the gateway block. But it's not possible to remove these blocks by just doing the same thing as the outer bedrock, because a piston facing into these blocks would of course just get deleted by the initial generation of the gateway. In the case of the gateway block, it might look like it's possible to have a piston facing into it and not get deleted, but the gateway also sets air in a 3x3x5 area around it, where this glass is here, so that's not possible either. So the real challenge here is figuring out a way to remove these 3 inner gateway blocks. And like in 1.12, you have to remove the bedrock blocks before the gateway, otherwise the entity that you send through the gateway would always make the next exit gateway find one of these bedrock blocks, and it would generate 10 blocks above one of them, therefore making it impossible to cycle the gateway down. So you have to be able to cycle the gateway either downwards or on the same Y level as the previous gateway. Otherwise, you just end up cycling the gateways on top of each other over and over again, and then you'd eventually hit world height limit, so then you'd be boned. And you can't remove the bedrock blocks and the gateway block at the same time. You need some sort of time frame between when you remove the bedrock blocks then you send an item or some entity through the gateway, and then you remove the gateway. It's impossible to remove them all at the same time and have a working farm. So there's a few different methods of removing the 3 inner gateway blocks in 1.13 that I know of. The first method is by using a player with a water bucket or a dispenser with a water bucket, and that can delete the gateway block if you place the water inside of it. There's a problem with using a dispenser though, and that is that it would get deleted by the initial generation of the gateway, just like a piston would. And since you can't move dispensers, the only choice you have here is to use an AFK player holding a water bucket, which is obviously not ideal. If you wanted to very easily get rid of the top bedrock, you could make the gateway generate at world height limit. If you did this, you could also cycle the gateway horizontally instead of vertically, so both locations where you cycle the gateway would be at world height limit. You can also make an Endstone island delete the bottom half of a previously generated gateway, so this would remove the bottom bedrock of the 3 inner gateway blocks. Unfortunately, this method is quite convoluted to do, and it can't be done for every gateway that generates. A secondary gateway's generation can delete all 3 inner gateway blocks of another gateway. However, this method deletes the bedrock and the gateway block at the same time, which means that you can't use it. Alternatively, you could have a secondary gateway delete the top inner bedrock block, and then have a third gateway delete the bottom inner bedrock block, so you'd just be left with the gateway block. However, you'd be left with a lot of other problems, such as removing the bedrock of the secondary and third gateways that you use to remove the first gateway's bedrock, and then you'd have to figure out a way to recycle those gateways. So there's a lot of problems with that, which wouldn't work with this type of setup. So all of those methods can be mixed and matched with each other, along with pistons to remove the outer bedrock, but you're always going to have a problem with one of the 3 inner gateway blocks not getting removed, or all of them being removed at the same time. This brings us to the final method, which is using headless piston setups. There's a variety of different headless piston setups that you can use in 1.13, all of which are based on research by Myron Ario and Coolman. At first, I thought I was going to have to use TNT to get the headless pistons needed for a setup, which would be extremely convoluted, but then I realized that you could just use the 3x3x5 generation of air around the gateway to get the headless pistons needed for free. So with any of these positions around the gateway, you can face a piston into it and extend it right before the gateway generates at the same time as the outer bedrock pistons, and you can get free headless pistons anywhere around the gateway. So now all you need is a headless piston setup that you can use to remove the inner 3 gateway blocks, while having the headless pistons that you need in each setup being able to be created by the air around the gateway. This is a headless piston setup that Ed Example showed in one of his videos, and as you can see, you need 2 headless pistons per bedrock broken, which is standard. Now what you can actually do is rotate this extended piston in any direction, and the headless piston that faces into it can be moved as well. But the important thing to note here is that in any orientation, these headless pistons have 3 blocks in between them, which is the same width as the gateway. So over here, this is what we are doing in the farm. You can use these 2 headless pistons to remove the top bedrock, and these 2 headless pistons to remove the bottom bedrock. Once the bedrock is removed, then you can use these 2 headless pistons to remove the gateway block. So the final piston layout in the farm looks something like this. You need a bit more stuff for the layout though, for example slime and other redstone. This is just the basic piston layout. Now we're doing everything on one side of the gateway, and there's 2 reasons for this. The first reason is because of the isBlock normal cube restrictions. So if you can imagine, this is the side of the gateway where the gateway is searching for isBlock normal cubes, and you had the piston layout to remove the gateway, this side of the gateway. Because you also need slime for the piston layout, and slime is an isBlock normal cube, every time you cycled the gateway either up or down, you'd have to move this slime as block 36 form. So the slime wouldn't be considered an isBlock normal cube when it is in block 36 form. But moving the slime like that just adds a layer of complexity which isn't necessary. And doing everything on the side of the gateway where you don't have to worry about isBlock normal cube restrictions is just a lot easier to wire it up. Now the second reason why we're doing everything on one side of the gateway, and the more important reason, has to do with these 3 pistons right here. Now these 3 pistons are the pistons that break the inner 3 gateway blocks, and they have to be facing into the same direction as the blocks you want to break. However, these pistons are also the pistons that pop off as items when you break those blocks. So for example, if you were to have the gateway removal piston on this side of the gateway and had the bedrock pistons on this side of the gateway, now these 2 pistons are facing in opposite directions. So when they pop up as items and you have to have the player AFK replace them, as far as I know, it's not possible to have an AFK player replace pistons in 2 different directions without a script. And it's much easier to just push in all the pistons from one side of the gateway in one line without having to push them in different directions and orientations. So that is the main reason why everything is done on one side of the gateway. So those are all the basics behind the gateway removal. Obviously there's much more going on in terms of the redstone. So for example, these pistons right here are inside the area where the gateway normally sets air. you have to move those pistons outside that range before the gateway generates. Kind of like this. So these pistons right here get moved in. So 90% of this redstone is just to remove the gateway, and then the other 10% is just cramming all the 1.12 stuff that you would normally need in an Endstone farm around the gateway removal redstone. So I will not be going over this redstone just because it's so convoluted. You could spend an hour going over this stuff. If you want to take a look at it, you can just take a look at the world download, and you can take a look at it for yourself. Now there is one more thing I want to talk about, although it doesn't relate to the gateway removal directly, and that is regarding the piston items that pop up as items. At first, you might not think the piston items could ever do anything in the farm to mess it up. However, there is a very small chance that a piston item falls into the dataless gateway at the same moment that the minecart is in the dataless gateway, and then the hopper minecart updates the dataless gateway, turning it into an entrance gateway, and the entrance gateway can actually prefer to send the piston item through the gateway instead of the minecart that you want to get sent by the gateway. Now at first this isn't a big issue because the piston item gets teleported in the same game tick that the minecart would have in the same tick phase because it's based off of the gateway. The problem arises when the minecart continues falling down above the hopper minecart that you bounced up to update the dataless gateway, and then the minecart will just fall down on top of this hopper minecart. So the next time you want to bounce this hopper minecart up to update the next dataless gateway, the hopper minecart will get blocked by the minecart, and in turn breaking the whole farm. So I can demonstrate this right now. And it'll be fairly fast, so you may have caught it there. The minecart didn't get teleported through the gateway because I intentionally made it so it wouldn't get teleported. But the minecart, it fell down on top of the hopper minecart. So we have a check here with this piston every time the hopper minecart falls down, where if a minecart is above it, it gets pushed onto this rail and then transported back up to the minecart storage. And the piston item that got teleported through the gateway instead of the minecart gets teleported to the same position where the minecart would have, and we have a hopper minecart that picks up items, the piston items, and recycles them back to the player. Now this only occurs like 1 in 1,000 times you cycle the gateway, but it's a high enough chance where, well, any chance is bad for this farm if it can break, because if the farm breaks you have to load a backup because you can't fix it. So a 1 in 1,000 chance of it breaking is a pretty high chance for this. So in order to make it 100% reliable, that is one thing I had to do. It's actually kind of a cool solution to the problem. However, if you had hopper minecarts inside the pistons that pop up as items, this problem wouldn't be a problem because the piston items would never have a chance to go through the gateway instead of the minecart. So you could solve two problems at once if you were able to pick up all the pistons in a layout with hopper minecarts. So that is just something I wanted to mention in case anyone was wondering what the heck the rail lines and stuff were doing, because it wouldn't look like they were ever being used. I have provided 2 world downloads in the description. One is for creative and one is for survival. The creative one is just with the gateway already in the farm, and all you have to do is turn it on and it will work. And the other world download for survival, the one I'm in right now, that one is without the gateway in the cycling, and it's exactly how you'd build the farm in survival, at the same coordinates and everything. So that is the world download that I'm going to be using to show you the survival setup of the farm. Okay, so everything is identical to 1.12 except for the final gateway shift into the farm. You need some additional redstone for that to work, but everything else is identical to 1.12. So that is what I'm going to go over first, is just shifting the gateway to the farm. I'm not going to explain everything because I've already explained it in the 1.12 video, but I will go through the very basics. So the first thing you want to do is determine which entrance gateway you want to use at the main end island. These are the same ones as 1.12. These two gateways right here, and they have to be an unopened entrance gateway for this in order to work, which means nobody has ever gone through that gateway before. Now you can use any unopened entrance gateway from the main end island. Those two gateways that I just showed you are the most easy to use to gateway shift into the farm. So what you need to do is look at the main end island entrance gateway that you want to use. So for example, this one. And the vector from 0, 0 through that entrance gateway is represented by this diamond line. And what you need to do is occupy the chunks from radius 1024 to radius 768 on the vector that the main end island entrance gateway is on. So all these chunks need to be occupied, which just means any placing a block above the first subchunk. You need to occupy all these chunks from radius 768 to radius 1024, and you need to occupy all the chunks between this gateway vector and the gateway vector of the farm. So this one right here with that light blue stained glass down there. And it would be the same if you were going to use any other unopened entrance gateway from the main end island. You just need to shift further. For example, that one over there, you'd have to shift pretty far over. So to do the first gateway shift, you need to make sure that the first brewing stand is loaded in the world, and you need to make sure that the main end island entrance gateway is unloaded. And then you need to keep this brewing stand loaded in the world, and the easiest way to do that is with a player. So there we go, we have a player loading this brewing stand, and then you can go to the main end island and throw an item through the entrance gateway. And then you can go through it yourself. And if everything was done correctly, you should be able to throw an item inside the gateway there and not have it teleported. Additionally, you can go in it and it won't teleport you. So then you just have to gateway shift to the farm. So what I'm going to do, after you gateway shift to this position, this is the last position before you have to shift the gateway into the farm. So if you haven't already, this is the point where you have to build the whole rest of the farm. Now I'd actually suggest doing the gateway shifting first and then building the whole farm. That way you know if you're able to gateway shift, then you'll be able to get the farm working when you're done building it. Now there's a few things to mention about the build itself. Everything should be fairly self-explanatory here, except for the hopper minecarts that are scattered throughout the cycling. There's a lot of hopper minecarts inside blocks, and they're aligned against different blocks as well. So look at the hitboxes of the minecarts and make sure they're in the exact same positions as they are in the farm. Otherwise, if they're not, then you risk losing a lot of pistons per hour or the farm breaking entirely. If I had to align a minecart against a block, I tried to leave that block in the farm itself. For example, this anvil here, this is what I used to align this minecart down here. This cobble wall is what I aligned this minecart against. So the blocks I used were cobble walls, anvils, and glass panes, and I think those were the main ones I used to align stuff. So for example, this one here used a glass pane. So just take that into consideration when you're building the farm. If a hopper minecart is not in the correct position, it can break the farm. Now, I'd also highly recommend building a mob switch while building this, because you need one while running it as well. That's something I never really mentioned in the 1.12 video, but you need a mob switch to run this farm. Technically you don't, but if you don't, then there's a high likelihood that an enderman could potentially spawn somewhere where it shouldn't and block a hopper minecart or something of that nature. So make sure you have a mob switch or some way of preventing endermen from entering the farm. The next step is to remove the bedrock of this last gateway. So in order to do that, you can use pistons. You have to be careful when you're removing the bedrock. Just be careful not to update the Headless gateway. Most notable things that can update it are a spectator clicking it, or having an ender pearl thrown into it, or something like that. There'll be a full list of things that can update Headless blocks in the description if you were wondering. So once you remove all the bedrock from this gateway, the next step is to build a little bit more redstone here. So you need a slab here with a rail, and then redstone torch on a slab powering the rail, and then a dispenser right here with a minecart in it. You also need an observer right here. So that is the final redstone. The next thing to do is make sure that the brewing stand is in the farm already. And if you're confident everything else is built correctly, now you can do the final step, which is updating this Headless gateway and sending an update to this observer. If you've done everything correctly, a gateway should appear in the farm just like this. And the next thing you can do is go ahead and remove all this extra redstone here. So I'm going to do that. Now you have to be careful around this gateway here. If an item gets teleported into it, it will end up on the top of the cycling here, and it will go in this hopper minecart and get put into where the piston should be. So take that into consideration. You can also remove this minecart and put a rail here. Okay, so now you need to remove the Endstone island that generated here. In the world download, I have an egg. If you throw the egg, it will delete the Endstone island. Obviously, you won't build this in survival. You'll just have to manually remove it. And then you can come up here, remove this sign, and then remove this red glass up here. And if you remove this minecart and put the rail there, then you're ready to go. So now you should be able to go and AFK and place pistons, and it should work. Let's just try that out. Everything seems to be working. So congratulations, you now have a working 1.13 Endstone farm. Anyways, that's all I wanted to show for this video. If you have any questions, make sure to ask in the comments. But other than that, I'll see you guys next video. Bye.